Not our concern. You're drifting within critical proximity to our structure. Get your vehicle under control immediately, or we will be required to respond with force granted under permissions in Article 1906B, Protection of Contracted Property.
The call ended, a rude finale to an annoying experience, but one Officer X5-329 was more than used to in his daily routine. His position was one part traffic control and another part routine zone enforcement. Every day was exactly the same, he mused while sipping at a cold coffee, as he sat within the worn cockpit of his Caldwell Interceptor. Scanners continued to clock the loitering vehicle as divergent from regulated flight paths and idle. A fleeting, cynical thought entered his mind and encouraged a smirk to grow across his face. He could engage building defenses, blow that flight car out of the sky. It'd be a simple swipe to the hollow interface that he was monitoring. That'd teach them, he thought. There'd be nothing left of the insolent trespasser but shrapnel. By the time morning rolled around, everyone in the district would see it splashed all over the Megaris news ticker. Oh yes, all commuters would think twice about loitering around the intracore building without a permit to diverge from established flight paths. Well, at least for a couple of days they would. With a sigh and an uncomfortable wince, he took another sip at the bitter, off-temperature drink he'd been nursing on and off for the last few hours. The thing about swiping engage on the defense matrix was that he'd be spending the next day filling out near-endless reports. Hightower would need to file a number of forms from damage assessment to risk analysis, and of course, the almighty possibility of lost assets. It would be his luck, after all, that the passenger in the skycab would turn out to be someone important. The kid of some Capricorn engineer, or artist, or maybe a Caldwell executive's grandmother. Even if he managed to get clear of all fault, it'd be a nightmare. He'd be tagged reckless by command and inevitably be sent to a worse gig than the one he was currently on. But damn, if it wasn't fun to daydream about it. Returning his concentration to the task at hand, his brow furrowed at the out-of-place blip on his display. They should have moved on by now. Placing his coffee back in its holder, with gritted teeth, he felt his nerves begin to fray. If they didn't move on soon, he'd be forced to kick the Interceptor into gear and physically get an eye on the situation. That'd be just great. He'd already spent the last 3 shifts working overtime to help the company in keeping up with a fortuitous overbalance of law enforcement contracts it had fallen into over the past 6 months. If only that help had been voluntary.
Come on, just move along.
Seconds continued to tick down as his display began to flash red. This was not how one might get home and watch the Harbingers live instead of by rerun. Again. Stalling one last second, he flipped down the visor of his helmet, cursing as he reached down to the ignition with the intent of lurching his fighter craft into motion. Then it happened. The blip was suddenly moving, and fortune had finally shone its lucky light down upon him. Slowly, and to his great relief, the offender rejoined the flow of traffic as the flashing alert de-escalated. Within moments after that, everything had returned to the peace of orderly transit. Everything was in its place again.
Officer X5329, this is X5212. I'm responding to a call at Deluxe. Hightower's short-handed over there tonight. Looks like you're working overtime, Muffin.
Hey, that's a goddamn negative, Tracy. You're the only other interceptor up here. Protocol says we need 2 officers on hand at all times.
What don't you get about short-handed, 329? Hightower orders, we obey. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.
Pounding his fist on his steering wheel, he cursed for the second time in the last few minutes as the grav engines on his partner's ship engaged and the fighter lifted off from its docking pad before dropping the lever and flying out of the bay at top speed. It wasn't long before the blip representing the vehicle was gone, much like his chances of getting home at a reasonable time. Shaking his head, he was nearly startled out of his skin at a sudden knock on his window. With a scowl, he opened the door, his frustration getting the better of him in the moment, his training forgotten as he stepped out of the car.
Hey, this area's off limits.
The katana had sprung out of what had seemed like thin air and shadow. Officer X5-329 was no longer concerned by the streak of unfortunate events that insisted on infecting his life. All these worries were all so small as a sense of vertigo filled him, his body sliding off the blade to tumble down upon the metal surface of the docking pad. His last thought was one that was thankful for pain suppression technology. Stepping over the officer's body with long legs and silent grace, Derby Bell slid into the weathered driver's seat before reaching down to snatch the holocom up from the downed officer's body, the sliding door closing behind her.
Episode 7, Only Waves as Witness, coming soon. Welcome to Neo Atlantis.